The first thing Linda remembered was waking up too soon, her head feeling like a heavy weight and her arms completely numb. She lay in a bright hospital room, the world around her muted and distant, as though she were submerged underwater, though her body refused to move and her voice was gone. Her ears worked perfectly. She heard Deborah, her mother-in-law, standing just beside her bed, her tone flat and unhidden. "If it's a girl, just let her go. In our family, only boys matter." Panic clutched Linda's heart, but she couldn't scream. Moments later, Ryan, her husband, leaned in and murmured words that cut deeper than any surgical incision. "Don't worry. I already signed the papers." Papers for what Linda couldn't begin to imagine, but she sensed instantly it concerned the child she'd carried for 9 months. Suddenly, darkness closed in and she blacked out again. When she regained consciousness, a small bundle wrapped in pink lay against her chest. Her newborn daughter. Breathing softly, relief flooded through her, mingled with the sting of betrayal she'd just survived. Only then did the nurse, Maria, lean close and whisper, "Your son recorded everything they said while you were unconscious." Memories of foster homes and a childhood without love flickered through Linda's mind, reminding her how dangerously familiar betrayal had become. But now, with her daughter safe in her arms and the truth captured on a little boy's recorder, Linda realized she was no longer powerless. From this moment on, she would do whatever it took to protect her children and make sure no one could ever erase her family again. When Linda first heard Ryan's voice drift through the haze of anesthesia, the words landed like a hammer blow to her chest. Under the harsh glare of the operating room lights, her entire world went silent except for his calm, quiet assurance. "Don't worry. I already signed the papers." Even from that half-conscious state, Linda knew exactly what papers meant. Her mind raced back through every cold, unspoken moment that had pushed her to this point. All she had wanted was to welcome a new life into the world. But instead, she was now trapped, her body immobilized. As the man she married conspired in her absence to erase that very life before it could begin, she wanted to scream, to lunge toward him, to demand answers. But the drugs kept her pinned to the operating table. She felt the drip of sweat trace down her spine, the steady thrum of her heartbeat filling her ears, and the distant, muffled sound of her son. Zachary's small footsteps echoing against the sterile floor. Her heart clenched with fear for her unborn child, but her lips remained sealed. As Ryan's words reverberated in her mind, she remembered the nights he refused to come to her doctor's appointments, the way he clutched his phone whenever she tried to share a detail about morning sickness, as though he resented every moment she dwelled on her growing body. She had chalked it up to stress he worked long hours as a construction site manager, and money was tight. But now, in this frozen moment, she realized how self-deception had let her down. It wasn't only Ryan who had turned against her. Deborah, her mother-in-law, had already made her contempt clear. Linda remembered how, during her last weekend at home, Deborah had swept into the house with a suitcase, pretending to offer help. Within days, she had rearranged the baby's nursery exactly as Deborah wanted and insisted that Linda follow a rigid schedule for Zachary's feedings, never mind that those routines felt foreign to Linda's maternal instincts. Deborah's soft smile carried a sharp edge, every compliment tinged with disdain. Linda had told herself that it would be easier to keep Debbie happy, to nod and move aside. But as her pregnancy progressed, she sensed that something more sinister was brewing. Now, on that cold steel table, Linda realized the full depth of their cruelty. She had carried her daughter for 9 months, felt every kick, every flutter of movement, every flutter of hope. And now, as the anesthesia tugged at her eyelids, she felt that hope slipping away. Ryan had planned it all. He'd met with a lawyer days ago, forging documents that branded her unborn child a medical liability. The paperwork supposedly shifted all decision-making power to him, effectively absolving him of any moral or legal responsibility to protect their daughter. Even if it meant declaring a false emergency, fabricating complications in her chart so that no one would think to question the abrupt disappearance of a newborn girl. Through the murky fog, Linda recalled how she had once believed Ryan's charm, the way he brought her coffee on cold mornings, the way he cradled her hand as they walked through the old neighborhood where they met at 20. But those memories felt like a distant dream. Now they were tainted by every cruel word he had ever hushed into her ear. She thought of their wedding day, how he'd held her close, whispering promises of devotion. She remembered burning with pride when she secured her first raise at the diner where she worked nights, believing he would support her ambitions. Instead, he had undermined her confidence, reminding her that a woman's place was at home, not chasing a paycheck. While Linda drifted in and out of consciousness, a single thought anchored her fear. Her daughter's life lay in the hands of the same people who had woven this betrayal. But even as her lungs began to flood with the medicated haze, she detected the soft pattern of Zachary's sneakers outside the door. Somehow, her 9-year-old son had sensed his mother's peril and snuck into the hallway. He carried an old iPod, pressed record, and captured every damning word. Linda clung to that thought as if it were a lifeline. She had raised him to see beyond polite silence, to speak truth even when his voice trembled. He had understood, even when she could not. If those recordings existed, they were more powerful than all the forged papers in the world. As the anesthesiologist leaned in to adjust her mask, Linda summoned every ounce of strength left in her body to cling to that sliver of hope. Her mind spun with images of her son standing in the pale hospital corridor, determined and small, refusing to believe that his sister had no right to live. She breathed in, trying to steady her racing pulse, and allowed the edges of consciousness to slip away, ready to fight with every fiber of her being as soon as she could. In that moment, a fierce protectiveness flared within her, no matter what lay ahead. She would not let their plans succeed, even if she was paralyzed. Her maternal instinct roared to life, determined to save her daughter from the very people who promised her existence. 9-year-old Zachary Martinez had learned early that silence could be a weapon, that sometimes the most powerful statement was made without uttering a single word. But on the morning his little sister, Abigail, was born, he knew he could not stay silent. As his mother, Linda, was wheeled into surgery for her cesarean delivery, he clung to his battered, hand-me-down iPod in his hoodie pocket. He had slipped into the hospital hallway instead of going home with the neighbor, because he sensed, long before anyone else did, that something was terribly wrong. From the moment he saw his brother's car pull away, leaving the hospital doors swinging shut behind his mother's wheelchair, a knot of dread tightened in his chest. He remembered the way his father, Ryan, and grandmother, Deborah, had not so quietly argued the night before about how only boys matter in their family. He remembered hearing his dad's low voice speak of papers and keeping things simple if his mother dared to hope for a daughter. And so, with the naivety and fierce loyalty that only a 9-year-old can possess, Zachary resolved to keep watch. He hugged his iPod close, praying that somehow he would be able to capture the truth as Linda's silhouette disappeared through the swinging double doors. He slipped in behind her, his small feet silent against the linoleum floor. The antiseptic scent of the hospital was strong in his nose. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He noticed the nurses and doctors moving purposefully, their backs to him as they hurried toward the operating room, with trembling hands. He navigated the narrow corridor until he stood, heart pounding, just outside the frosted glass window of operating room 3. Inside, He could see his father's broad frame standing by the door, hands in his pockets. Face calm. Expression unreadable. Deborah hovered nearby, her posture stiff and poised, as though she were waiting for a performance to begin. Zachary swallowed hard, his pulse thundering in his ears, and pressed record on his iPod. The small red light blinked, but he could not afford to let his fear freeze him. This was his only chance. He heard his grandmother's breathy whisper, "First, if it's a girl, leave her. You know how this family works. Boys are all that matters." The icy certainty in Deborah's voice sent a bolt of panic through Zachary's chest. He gripped the iPod tighter, his knuckles whitening. He could not let this happen. He thought of his mother's gentle smile. How she had told him that a sister would be his best friend, someone to teach and protect. That vision had given him hope during a childhood spent in and out of foster homes. But now that dream threatened to dissolve in an instant. Then his father's voice, calm, almost casual. "Don't worry," Ryan said. "I already signed the papers. To an adult." Those words might have sounded bureaucratic, but to Zachary, they were chilling. He recalled his mother's faint screams when she discovered the final printed document, a parental consent form, granting Ryan total authority over medical decisions. Despite Linda's protests, in that moment, Zachary had vowed to protect his mother and unborn sister from any injustice, even if it meant doing something he barely understood. He felt tears sting his eyes, but he blinked them back and continued to record every word. "Just say there were complications," Deborah added in a tone of forced patience. "No one will question a medical emergency. We'll explain it away." There was a cold precision to her voice, as if she had rehearsed this plan for weeks. Zachary's small frame shook with silent sobs. He thought of his mother's exhausted figure stretched out on the hospital bed, unable to protect herself. He had dragged himself out of bed at dawn, stuffing his iPod into his hoodie like a shield, determined to witness the truth. Now that truth was unfolding in the harsh white light of an operating room. He recorded Deborah's final instruction, "If it's a boy, let us know. We'll celebrate. But a girl, we just don't keep girls." His heart pounded so loudly that he was certain someone inside would hear it. He pressed his forehead to the glass, willing himself to remain invisible. Tears blurred his vision, but the recording continued without pause. And then, just as he feared, he heard the distant wail of a newborn Abigail's first cries. Zachary felt his breath catch. His sister was fighting for her life, and so was his mother. He knew the slightest interruption could cause his father and grandmother to snap. He pressed a finger to his lips, urging himself to stay still, to remain unseen. For several agonizing seconds, silence reigned. Then Deborah muttered, "She's just a girl, no name. We'll decide later. Let's get them out before someone notices." Zachary remembered the way the door swung open a crack, revealing a single masked nurse stepping out for a breath of fresh air. His small mind raced. He needed someone to believe him. The nurse might dismiss him as a frightened child, but he had to try. As she stepped into the hallway, his legs burned with the effort of holding still. When she reached the glass window, he tapped gently on the pane. She startled, but as he thrust the iPod toward her, he whispered, "Listen, please." Her eyes widened. She wore thick-rimmed glasses and a name badge that read, "Maria, RN." Instead of shooing him away, she crouched down to his level and pressed play on the iPod. As Deborah's hateful words spilled through the speaker's tiny earbuds, Maria's face hardened with resolve. She placed a gentle hand on Zachary's shoulder and said in a low, reassuring voice, "You did the right thing. Sweetie, stay here." Then she stepped into the operating room and closed the door behind her, leaving Zachary alone in the hallway with his racing thoughts. His small heart swelled with relief. He had done it. He had captured the proof his mother so desperately needed, even if he didn't fully understand the ramifications. He thought of his own life, drifting from foster home to foster home, never feeling truly safe. He imagined his baby sister growing up protected and loved, instead of being discarded like trash. In that moment, he felt grown up in a way he hadn't before. He was not a helpless child, but a guardian, sworn to guard his family's most precious truth. 30 minutes later, when his mother finally emerged from surgery, pale but determined, Maria brought Zachary to her bedside as Linda opened her eyes and saw her son standing there, clutching the iPod. Linda felt tears of gratitude pool in her vision. That night, as the recording reverberated through the hospital's walls, it set in motion a chain of events nobody, including Ryan and Deborah, could ever suppress. For Zachary, it was more than an act of bravery. It was a testament to the power of a child's voice, the very voice that would save his sister's life and redefine his family's future. Nancy Thompson had worked in the maternity ward at St. Mary's Hospital for over 2 decades. She had witnessed hundreds of births, comforted countless new mothers, and comforted families through both joy and heartbreak. Yet, on this brisk spring morning, something in the air felt unusually tense. As soon as she stepped off the elevator and into the hallway outside operating room 7, she noticed a small figure standing just beyond the double doors, a pale-faced 9-year-old boy clutching an old iPod. His eyes were wide with urgency, and Nancy instantly recognized the fear that flickered across his face. Nancy's instincts kicked in. She crouched down to meet the boy at eye level. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" she asked gently. The boy, Ethan, pressed a gloved hand against the glass window of the operating room. The cool surface sent a shiver through her. He held up the iPod and, without hesitation, tapped its screen. Nancy braced herself and pressed play. In an instant, she was confronted by the unmistakable, chilling voices of his grandmother, Evelyn Scott, and his father, Michael Scott. 2 people who should have been celebrating the imminent arrival of their granddaughter. Grace, instead. Evelyn's icy whisper, "If it's a girl, leave her. In our family, only boys matter," cut through the sterile hush of the hospital corridor. Michael's voice followed, calm and measured. "Don't worry, I already signed the papers." As Nancy listened, her heart pounded. Every nurse at St. Mary's had taken an oath to protect and care for both mother and child. To hear plans for deliberate abandonment when a baby girl emerged from the womb was beyond reprehensible. Nancy glanced back at the operating room window to confirm what Ethan had witnessed. Through the frosted glass, she could make out Evelyn's rigid posture and Michael's impassive silhouette. Time seemed to slow as Nancy's mind raced. She had to act swiftly, yet carefully, to prevent a grievous wrong. Nancy rose to her feet, the iPod still in her hand. She placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You did the right thing." "Ethan," she said quietly so only he could hear. "Now, run back to your mom's room and stay there. I'll handle this." Ethan hesitated for a moment, his small chest heaving with relief and terror, but then nodded and retreated down the hallway, clutching his treasured recorder. Without a second's delay, Nancy pocketed the iPod and slipped through the narrow gap where the authorized personnel only sign was posted. She had been on call that morning precisely because the ward was understaffed. Now, she was grateful for the opportunity to take charge, inside the operating room. The antiseptic-lit space felt suffocating. The surgical team was preparing for the cesarean section. The anesthesiologist adjusted his mask. A scrub nurse organized the sterile instruments, and the obstetrician scrubbed in near the patient, Margaret Scott. Nancy's pulse quickened when she saw Evelyn patted Michael's back, as though the 2 of them were simply waiting for good news. Nancy swallowed and approached the lead surgeon, Dr. Coleman, who was reviewing Margaret's chart. Dr. Coleman, Nancy said, her voice steady but urgent. We need to pause. I have listening evidence that Mr. Scott and Mrs. Scott are planning to leave their granddaughter here immediately after birth. They intend to falsify medical records to make it look like a complication. Dr. Coleman paused mid-scrub, his eyes narrowing with concern. Show me, he said quietly. Nancy handed him the iPod. He pressed play, and together they listened to Evelyn's chilling declaration and Michael's casual admission. I already signed the papers. Nancy glanced at Margaret, who lay unconscious, vulnerable under the bright surgical lights, the thought of the newborn being discarded, deprived of a chance at life, made Nancy's chest tighten. Dr. Coleman looked up from the small screen, his face set with grim determination. Get security here and call hospital administration. We must initiate emergency safeguarding measures for this baby and the mother. Nancy nodded and stepped back toward the door. Retrieving her phone from her pocket, as she dialed the hospital operator, she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Moments later, 2 security officers arrived, Officer Ramirez and Officer Patel, both seasoned veterans familiar with handling crises. Nancy briefed them in hushed tones, while Dr. Coleman continued prepping Margaret and her medical team for surgery. We'll need to isolate Mr. and Mrs. Scott, Dr. Coleman instructed. They should not be allowed near the mother or the newborn. We'll pretend everything is proceeding normally while we secure the legal paperwork. Nancy guided Officer Ramirez toward the waiting area, where Michael and Evelyn were sitting stiffly, pretending to look through outdated magazines. The officers approached with polite firmness. Mr. Scott. Mrs. Scott. May we see you in Dr. Coleman's office for a moment? There are some new medical forms that need your signature. Michael glanced at Evelyn, annoyance flickering across both their faces. Resigned. They followed the officers down the corridor, unaware of the recording, waiting to unmask their scheme. Back in the operating room, Nancy returned to the nurse's station and signed off the emergency safeguarding document that Dr. Coleman and hospital counsel had prepared. This document granted full medical authority to Margaret upon her recovery and initiated contact with Child Protective Services immediately after birth. Nancy's hands trembled slightly as she placed her initials next to the hospital administrators, because for the first time in 20 years, she felt the weight of something far greater than a routine medical procedure. This was about protecting an innocent life. An hour later, as Margaret was wheeled into recovery cradling her newborn daughter, Grace, Nancy stayed by her side. Margaret slept fitfully, but the first time she stirred, Nancy leaned close and whispered, "You're safe now. Your daughter is safe." Margaret's eyes fluttered open, brimming with both exhaustion and relief. Her gaze fell upon Grace, wrapped snugly in a pastel blanket. Nancy motioned for Margaret to squeeze her daughter's tiny hand. "It was your son, Ethan," Nancy explained softly. "He recorded his grandmother and father planning to abandon Grace. We took action immediately." Margaret's tears glistened in the gentle glow of the recovery lights. She clutched Grace to her chest, listening as Nancy outlined the next steps, contacting social services, ensuring Margaret regained full custody, and arranging legal assistance. Though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, custody hearings, potential avenues of retaliation, and the emotional scars of betrayal, Nancy's steadfast presence offered Margaret a glimmer of hope as the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting warm beams through the tall hospital windows. Nancy sat beside Margaret, gently holding her hand as she drifted off to sleep. Outside the recovery room, she glanced at the hallway, where Ethan would soon return to see his mother and little sister safe. Nancy felt a surge of pride and gratitude thanks to one brave child and one vigilant nurse. A life had been saved, a family preserved, and a future reclaimed. Margaret blinked into the soft glow of the recovery room lights, the weight of her newborn daughter, Grace, cradled against her chest. Relief washed over her as she felt the steady rise and fall of Grace's small frame beneath the pink blanket. Her body ached. But more than anything, she felt a fierce, protective clarity. As her vision cleared, she noticed Maya, lead nurse, on the floor, standing at her bedside with a clipboard. Maya's expression was a mixture of compassion and resolve as she slipped a sheet toward Margaret. "This is an emergency protective hold," Maya explained gently. "It gives you full medical decision-making authority for Grace, without interference from Mr. Scott or Mrs. Scott. They don't know we're moving on this yet." Margaret's hands trembled as she scanned the document. The form outlined the hospital's immediate safeguarding measures, isolating Michael Scott and his mother, Evelyn Scott, from the neonatal unit, and notifying Child Protective Services to ensure Grace's safety. With a shaky breath, Margaret signed her name. Instantly, she felt a surge of empowerment after months of feeling powerless under Michael's dismissive cruelty and Evelyn's cold dominance. She was reclaiming both her voice and her daughter's right to life. A few moments later, the door opened quietly, and Ethan Margaret's 9-year-old son slipped inside, accompanied by another nurse. His small frame looked brittle with worry, but his eyes shone with pride as he saw his mother awake and cricketed his iPod in his hand. Margaret reached out, and Ethan climbed onto the edge of the bed, resting one hand gently on Grace's tiny foot. "Is she okay?" he whispered, voice cracking. "Did they try to take her?" Margaret gathered her courage and nodded, fighting back tears. "They did. But we have proof they planned to leave her here as soon as she was born. You saved her, sweetheart." Ethan's face softened. Relief melted the tension out of his posture as he inched closer to embrace his sister. Margaret lifted Grace so Ethan could see her wide-eyed face and dark hair. They huddled together, 3 against the world, while Maya and a hospital administrator, Claire Jenkins, moved swiftly into action behind the scenes. In the hallway just beyond the recovery room, security officers escorted Michael and Evelyn to a private conference room under the pretense of reviewing additional insurance paperwork, unaware of the recording's existence. They complained quietly about the perceived inconvenience. Inside, Claire and Maya waited with the iPod connected to the room's speaker system. As Michael scanned the floor for assurances, Evelyn continued offering patronizing comments about Margaret's drama. The nurse pressed play, and their own voices caught on Ethan's recorder filled the room. "If it's a girl, leave her," Evelyn had said, her tone as blunt as any hospital announcement. "Don't worry," Michael's voice followed. "I already signed the papers." Silence fell like a guillotine blunt. Michael's eyes widened, then narrowed as he tried to argue they'd been misheard. Evelyn's face flared red with indignation. Claire gave no quarter. "You've been recorded plotting to abandon a newborn. We're contacting Child Protective Services and local authorities. You will not be permitted near Margaret or the baby." Michael's protests rang out. But Claire didn't flinch. "You forfeited any parental rights when you conspired to erase your own flesh and blood," she said. Evelyn's cold smile crumbled. Officers waited outside to physically escort them off the floor, leaving Michael's watch and Evelyn's stiff posture the last impressions in the lobby. Back in Margaret's recovery room, everything that had felt unreal just hours ago was now terrifyingly concrete. She thought of the forged consent forms Michael had drawn up, documents that purported to shift medical authority entirely to him. But those papers were invalid now. Margaret's signature on the emergency protective hold, combined with the audio evidence and hospital policy, superseded any false documentation. Maya explained that Child Protective Services would investigate, and that if Margaret wished, legal aid could be provided through a local nonprofit network. The idea of a legal team fighting for her felt like a beacon, something she had only ever dreamed of while trapped under Michael's domineering behavior. Over the next day, Margaret and her children were discharged into a women's support shelter arranged by the hospital's social work department. They arrived in the early morning, Margaret carrying a simple diaper bag, Ethan clutching his iPod, and Grace swaddled in a soft blanket. The shelter's administrator greeted them at the door, a kind woman named Laura, who offered spare clothes, toiletries, and reassurance. Margaret's heart squeezed as she saw how cramped the small room was, barely large enough for a twin bed and a crib, but she accepted that this was freedom, however humble. Within days, Maya connected Margaret with a pro bono family law attorney, Olivia Chen, who filed for full custody of both children and secured an emergency protection order. At the first hearing, the judge listened to the recording Ethan had made, then reviewed the hospital's internal inquiry, discovering the forged sections of Michael's paperwork. The judge's decision was swift. Margaret was granted sole legal and physical custody of Grace and Ethan. Michael's parental rights were terminated, and Evelyn was barred from any contact. Ethan testified in a separate, child-friendly proceeding with the guidance of a youth advocate. Though he was anxious, he stood tall as he described what he saw and heard. "I just knew it was wrong," he told the judge, "and I knew my mom couldn't speak." His clear, steady voice became the emotional core of the case, reminding everyone that courage comes in any size. When he emerged from the hearing, Margaret wrapped him in a fierce hug. "You're my hero," she whispered. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a restorative routine. Margaret began sharing her story in small community groups, a domestic violence support meeting here, a women's empowerment workshop there. She found that by speaking her truth, she was reclaiming not only her own power, but also validating the quiet struggles of countless other women. Ethan enrolled in a coding class at a local youth center, where he quickly made friends who admired his bravery. Grace thrived under Margaret's watchful care, her bright eyes following every movement around her, as if already sensing the fierce love that surrounded her. One morning, as the sun painted golden streaks across their modest living room, Margaret held Grace close and said softly, "You are our miracle, baby girl." Ethan sat nearby, propping a toy robot upright on a small table. He looked up and asked, "Mom, will we ever see Dad again?" Margaret took a deep breath, pressing her daughter's forehead to her chest. "No," she replied. "He made his choice, and we made ours. We'll be okay because we have each other." In the gentle quiet that followed, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living with purpose. With a voice strengthened by truth and a family bound by unbreakable loyalty, she was free to walk forward one fearless step at a time into the life she had fought so hard to reclaim. By the time the first court date arrived, Linda's heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She sat beside Ethan in a small, windowless courtroom, clutching her daughter, Abigail, whose presence felt like a beacon of hope after the storm they had endured. As the judge entered and took her seat, Linda recalled the recording Ethan had made, the chilling whispers of her own husband and mother-in-law plotting to abandon a baby girl. That single act of bravery, Ethan pressing record on his iPod, was now the linchpin of everything. When the prosecutor played the audio for the judge, Ethan's voice trembled in the gallery of that tiny courtroom, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "If it's a girl, leave her. We only keep boys in this family," Deborah had said, followed by Ryan's calm assurance, "Don't worry, I already signed the papers." As those words echoed through the room, Linda stared at Abigail's tiny fingers curled against her neck, feeling the enormity of what might have happened next. The judge's expression remained steady, but Linda saw a flicker of disbelief behind his glasses. After the recording ended, the courtroom fell into a hush. Linda watched as her former husband, Ryan, sat in the defense bench, his face flushing with shame. Next to him, Deborah's posture betrayed her contempt, even as she tried to hide it behind a stiff posture. when the judge finally spoke. His voice was calm, but firm. This recording is one of the clearest examples of premeditated emotional abuse and attempted child abandonment I have ever encountered, he said. I find that the evidence supports granting Ms. Thompson's sole legal and physical custody of both children. Mr. Scott's parental rights are hereby terminated, and Ms. Scott, Sutter Deborah, is barred from any contact. The weight of those words settled heavily on Linda's shoulders in the best possible way. Relief washed over her as she folded Abigail closer, knowing that, at last, the law recognized her daughter's right to a safe childhood. She glanced at Ethan, who, a moment ago, had looked pale and frightened. Now, as he realized that his courage had changed their lives, he managed a small, proud smile. In that instant, Linda knew that the hardships of the past days had somehow forged a new strength within her entire family. Leaving the courthouse, Linda and her children stepped into the bright afternoon sun. They did not return to the house where so many cold words had echoed in every hallway. Instead, they moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood just a few blocks from a community center and a small park with maple trees that would turn golden in autumn. The living room was small, but the walls felt safe and welcoming, a stark contrast to the silence of the home they had fled. In the corner, a baby swing faced the window so Abigail could watch the leaves flutter outside, and a second-hand bookshelf already held a few of Ethan's favorite storybooks, with help from a local nonprofit. Linda enrolled in a job training program so she could eventually find work in the public library, a place where she could use her love of reading to help others. Something she had dreamed of before Ryan's control had chipped away at her independence. Every morning, she practiced filling out applications, her handwriting steady as she jotted down references. At night, in the calm glow of a single lamp, she completed a basic computer course on her laptop, determined to build a future centered around stability and service. Ethan, no longer haunted by fear, began attending a youth coding class at the community center. His tutor, Ms. Harper, noticed immediately how quiet he was, something that betrayed his keen observance rather than weakness. Slowly, he began to open up, laughing when he finally succeeded in writing a hello world program in Python for the first time in months. Linda heard the sound of genuine laughter echo through their apartment, mingling with Abigail's soft coos as she rocked in her swing. On weekends, Linda took the children to the park. She would sit on a bench beneath an old oak tree, watching Ethan kick a soccer ball to a new friend named Marcus, while Abigail sat safely in a stroller, reaching her hands toward the falling leaves. In those moments, Linda felt a profound sense of peace she had never known before. She remembered the weight of hospital lights and quiet threats, the way fear had almost robbed her of 2 children, and she felt gratitude for the chain of events that had led to this calm afternoon. Grateful, too, for the bravery of a small boy who refused to stay silent. At home, Linda began to share her story in a local support group for survivors of domestic abuse. Her voice, once timid and often silenced by Ryan's dismissive tone, grew confident as she recounted how a 9-year-old boy's faith in truth had saved a life. She spoke of the judge who had recognized that recording as a child's cry for justice. She talked about hope that could flourish even in the darkest corners of a hospital corridor. As she spoke, other women nodded, tears in their eyes, finding solace in her resilience. Night after night, Linda tucked Abigail into her crib and held Ethan close on the sofa, reading aloud from a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web. She traced the curve of Abigail's cheek, marveling at the softness of her breath. She ruffled Ethan's hair and whispered, "You saved us. Buddy, you saved your sister." In the dim lamplight, she watched his proud smile glow. Then she closed the storybook and reached over to switch off the lamp, letting the room settle into a gentle hush. Though the road ahead still held challenges, medical bills, the search for a permanent job, and the lingering ache of broken trust, Linda knew they would face each day together, with legal documents affirming her rights, with a loving shelter that had become their sanctuary, and with the steadfast support of friends and neighbors. Linda felt a quiet determination blooming inside her. She was not the same woman who had entered that hospital in fear. She was a mother fortified by love, guided by truth, and driven by the fierce promise of a new beginning. In the soft darkness, as Ethan drifted into sleep and Abigail slumbered in her crib, Linda whispered a prayer of thanks. She thought back to that fateful moment when Ethan had slipped into the hallway, iPod in hand, determined to capture the truth. Without him, none of this, none of the safety, none of the hope would have been possible. Linda closed her eyes, allowing herself the rare gift of rest, knowing that tomorrow she would face the dawn with renewed courage, because a family's love, once claimed, could never be erased. 9-year-old Ethan Martinez stood frozen in the hospital hallway, his small hands clutching an old iPod as whispers of betrayal drifted through the operating room window. In that moment, he faced a choice. Few children ever must turn away or stand up for truth. Though he was scared. Ethan pressed record, capturing his father's calm directive to abandon a newborn daughter and his grandmother's cold insistence that only boys mattered. His bravery reminds us that courage isn't measured by size or age, but by the willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In the days that followed, through tense courtroom hearings, late-night meals at a women's support shelter, and quiet moments reading storybooks to his baby sister, Abigail Ethan's steadfast spirit shone as a beacon of hope. He refused to let silence be the end of his family's story. Instead, his actions proved that one voice, no matter how young, can shatter lies and restore a mother's right to love her children. For all of us, especially those who have seen life's joys and challenges unfold over decades, Ethan's story is a powerful reminder that it is never too late to speak up, to stand up, and to choose what is right, even when the world seems determined to do otherwise. If Ethan's courage moved you, please leave a comment sharing how you've witnessed bravery in unexpected places. Subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that celebrate resilience, hope, and the enduring power of truth.